2017 Buick Regal Sport Torn, a decent American car with a splash of German influence, held back by America's growing rejection of the sedan and GM's plastic interiors. Alright, let's get it out now. Buick is the old person brand kept alive because the Chinese are infatuated with it.
It should have been Pontiac that survived!
They scream. Your tears won't change that. But in the 2010s, GM really tried to change that image. Well, they had one car that tried. Yeah. Aside from the reintroduction of the Regal as America's Opel insignia dumping ground, not much has really happened to change that image. They tried to reintroduce a compact Buick, and it failed. They brought back a convertible Buick, and it was essentially GM's late answer to the Chrysler Sebring convertible. The LaCrosse was still a big grandpa's car, and every additional SUV did nothing to really inspire young people in America. And that leaves Buick's 5th generation Regal. And yeah, I know the Buick Regal comes courtesy of GM's former German arm, Opel. But that's honestly what makes the Regal a decent little car. While the 4th generation Regal was a shameless rebadge of the century, the 5th generation would be its own unique vehicle.
In America!
And this comes mostly because the car was intended to be the 2nd generation Saturn Aura. At the time of its death, Saturn had gone from its own unique compact cars to rebadges in GM's Opel dumping ground. With the brand dead but still wanting the insignia in America, Buick got it instead. While Saturn kinda clashed with the Opel image, Buick would be a much better fit. Both were slightly upmarket brands that were kinda fancy, but not full-on luxury. The move had made a lot of sense on paper. The Germans designed the car for their market, and the Americans could build it.
In Canada!
It feels like a German car, almost like a cheaper Volkswagen. For a midsize in America, it's somewhat on the smaller side. Ford Fusions, Hyundai Sonatas, and Nissan Maximas simply feel larger when I pulled up to them. Hell, I felt like I was looking up at the door sill of a Nissan Sentra at one point. It's just enough car for the road, without actually taking up the whole road. Looking at you, modern midsize car market. Inside, there are some traits that simply feel they got the German touch. The front bucket seats are somewhat on the smaller size, especially in the derrière region. Cup holders are kind of inconveniently placed for the driver, and driver mannerisms feel more at home of carving mountain roads than wide open roads. So, yeah, mostly good things so far. Like I said before, this is the 5th generation of the Regal. The Regal was first introduced in 1973 and was a slightly upmarket version of the Century. This would continue into the 2nd generation, where the Century was split off into its own front-wheel drive model, and the Regal would essentially become Buick's quiet performance sleeper. This would be the generation that'd see the introduction of the Grand National in turbos. 3rd generation would finally follow the Century to front-wheel drive, but it would still be its own model, despite sharing much with the Pontiac Bonneville and Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Then came the 4th. All it is a slightly fancier, if you can say that, rebadge of the Century, and possibly the lowest point in the nameplate's life. This generation would get replaced by the LaCrosse, which would eventually become Buick's flagship model. And at this point, things were not looking good in America for the aging brand. But luckily, this is where the Chinese came in. They absolutely loved these chromed up American cars, and the brand was a cash cow for GM. So come 2008-2009, a hard decision had to be made. Buick was a core brand because of that success, and Pontiac did not have that to fall back on. Pontiac was dead. Long live Buick. So, Buick got an influx of new models aimed at younger buyers, but mostly aimed directly at the Chinese market. And unfortunately, that's why the Regal seems to be the only model that somewhat appears youth-oriented. Wow, I butchered that. Compared to the rest of the lineup. America simply isn't the focus for the brand. China is. This generation of Regal/Insignia sits on GM's midsize platform Epsilon 2. It shares this with the LaCrosse, the Chevy Malibu, the Cadillac XTS, and the stillborn Saab 9.5. Under the hood features an all-4-banger lineup. You either get a variation of the 2.4-liter Ecotec, or the 2-liter Ecotec with a turbo. This Sport Touring model sits just below the top-of-the-line GS, so it gets a LT6 with a spark-ignited direct injection and variable valve timing. But what does Sport Touring get you outside of the GS? No GS badges, different wheels,
And a spoiler.
Both models get the same 259 horsepower, 295 foot-pound four-cylinder. The Sport Touring model doesn't even get its own badge. It just has a special T badge on the trunk to dictate that
It has a turbo.
Never mind, I lied. The GS did feature Brembo brakes and hyper-strut front suspension, so essentially, you're getting a GS without all the cool stuff. So for 2017, you had 5 trim models to choose from. The base 1SV,
Turbo Sport Touring,
the straight-up turbo model, Turbo Premium 2, and then GS. Everything other than the base 1SV had the LT6 Turbo 4, and you couldn't even get the option of all-wheel drive until you hit the turbo model. And long gone at this point was the short-lived 6-speed manual, which had died sometime before the 2014 refresh. And to make everything even more confusing, all the trim levels got rebranded in that 2014 refresh, so older models still had names like CXL. I will say, though, that the refresh look looks better than the original 2010 model, as the added sculpted body lines really take the Regal away from its original jelly bean look. You also get the return of Buick's Ventaports. These things, which do nothing. It's a callback to the 1950s where they actually vented the engine heat. But now, you essentially have an AutoZone stick-on that comes straight from the factory. Classy! So, back on topic. This was the last year of the 5th generation Regal. It, and its German's twin, got a striking redesign in 2018. The 6th generation Regal Insignia received much more aggressive designs, and the sedan would be replaced with a fastback hatch known as the Sportback. And for the first time since 1996, Buick got a wagon. The very striking Tour X, aimed directly at Subaru's Outback and Volvo's Cross Country. But this was short-lived. Despite all of this, the Regal's return was never a hot seller in America. Its best year in America was 2011, where it sold 40,144 models. It had 2 other years that broke 20,000 sales, and it hasn't sold more than 15,000 since 2016. Despite being a hot seller in China, the writing was on the wall. GM needed to stop bleeding for its investors, so Buick's car models were axed in America. The Verano Compact was already dead after 2017, the Cascada and LaCrosse were killed after 2019, and the Regal will die after the 2020 model year. Which is a shame. It's a really good looking car. It's just unfortunate that it was introduced in the years of the rise of the crossover and into the sedan. Wait a minute. GM sold Opel to Group PSA, which includes Peugeot and Citroën, in 2017, which times out perfectly with the cancellation of the Holden brand in Australia, which features another rebadged insignia, the Commodore. Maybe making investors happy worked out perfectly for GM, as they had sold off the company that designed the Regal and Commodore. It just sucks, but sometimes business really is that simple. Oh well, the 2017 Buick Regal Sport Touring. When you really wanted a Volkswagen Passat, but you couldn't bring yourself to buy anything other than American. Thank you for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. Hope everything is going alright with the current state of affairs in the world, but hey, we're making by and I'm getting these out a lot more now. If you happen to have a car you'd like to see on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, be sure to either message my Facebook page at facebook.com/WookieDrives or DM my Twitter at WookieAutomoTV. Anyways, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, leave feedback in the comments, and hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.